Queen Elizabeth II, an icon of our times. Portrayed in films, artwork, photography, and more, the image of Queen Elizabeth has become a recognized and beloved icon that has defined an era. Her polished and perfected image, where we never quite get a glimpse of the real Elizabeth, has allowed her to maintain a sense of grandeur and majesty, whilst becoming a more modern monarch who is universally accepted and loved. Over almost a century, we have watched her style evolve from fairy tale princess to formal queen. Famously, the Queen said, "I must be seen to be believed," a sentiment that defines the Queen's royal wardrobe.
Her fashion has really contributed to the image that we will see of her in 100, 150 years' time. The Queen will always be remembered by this really distinct outfit. It will very clearly mark a period in history, and people will be able to identify her with ease for years to come.
In her 70-year reign, the Queen has witnessed enormous social, cultural, and technological change. The new Elizabethan era has seen some of the greatest changes and developments in human history. Her reign, a cornerstone to these extraordinary times.
I think the Queen, she had such a huge task ahead of her when she became Queen, when she was such a young woman, and she's really stepped up to the job, and she's shown how to do it beautifully while staying true to who she is, and I think we can all take inspiration from that.
Born a princess in the British royal family, Elizabeth was destined for the spotlight, yet she was not aware of her impending fate to reign as queen. It was a twist of that fate, one of history's greatest love stories, or perhaps tragedies, that would change the course of the young princess's life forever. The abdication of her uncle David, King Edward VIII, would leave Princess Elizabeth firmly in the line of succession, and where she would eventually feel the heavy burden of the crown placed upon her head.
It was Princess Elizabeth who told Princess Margaret, and she said, "Uncle David's going away and Papa is to be king." And Princess Margaret said to her, "Does that mean you're going to be queen?" And Elizabeth said, "Yes, one day."
Growing up, Elizabeth and her sister Margaret were extremely close. They led a blissful childhood, running around the family estates, tending to their ponies, and so began Elizabeth's lifelong love of horses. It was at this young age that Elizabeth began to develop one of her most iconic styles, the country look. This style, perhaps more than any other, gives us a glimpse into how the Queen may dress if she wasn't our monarch. Her off-duty look is relaxed, practical, and comfortable, yet so well put together. Over the course of her life, it has remained remarkably consistent. Whether she is walking around Balmoral with her corgis or riding her horses at Sandringham, she is easily recognized in this classic and much emulated country style.
So the Queen is a real country girl at heart. She has lived a very outdoorsy life. There's nothing she loves more than going on a good hike and going out on her horses. This has been part of her life since she was very little. Her mother spent a lot of time growing up in Scotland and always encouraged her family, her children, to visit Scotland regularly. The Queen loved going out hunting with her father and would borrow his trousers during the war so that she could continue even though she didn't have proper hunting clothes.
So I think the Queen is almost as famous for her country look as she is for her on-duty uniform, and she's really made that sort of upper-class British country style her own. So the essential elements of that, I think, are the silk headscarf, the Barber jacket, and a kilt, or perhaps some jodhpurs as well. And the Queen just looks so pristine when she wears this look. It might be a more casual, a more active kind of outfit, but she looks like she could have walked straight off a catwalk, to be honest, when she wears it. She just is always so well put together. And I think designers have really been inspired by that element of her look.
It's very prim, it's very proper, it's very similar in feel to her day-to-day royal clothes. It's very classic, but it has that practical edge to it.
Sporting this look from being just a young girl until well into her late 90s, nothing could be a clearer depiction of a style that is timeless. When Elizabeth and Margaret were young girls, the Queen Mother often chose to dress them in matching outfits. It was a signal of their shared status as princesses at the time.
I don't know how the Queen would have felt about being dressed who's 4 years younger than her, but I'm sure lots of children might be a little bit frustrated about that. And I guess when you're very young, you don't mind too much, but as you get a bit older, you might want to wear things that you personally feel more comfortable in. But I think it was a very clever strategy from her parents to show off these two little girls and show them as equals for as long as they could before the Queen fulfilled her destiny.
She really wasn't that fussed about the specific clothes that she had to wear. She was a very active young girl, and as long as she could run around outside and adventure all she wanted, that was fine with her. It was very, very important in the eyes of her parents that Margaret and Elizabeth should be dressed identically and to be dressed in quite a plain fashion. There was nothing particularly princessy about what they wore. It was to try and teach them to always keep one foot on the ground, and that you can't always rely on lovely sparkly dresses to prove that you're doing a good job. You have to back it up with actions.
I think the Queen and her family, despite all their treasures and riches, have actually always had a very sensible attitude to clothes. You know, they're very conscious of not wasting things, of reusing materials. There are lots of stories of her mother's ball gowns being repurposed into dresses for her and her sister. So there's quite a thrifty element to their style, actually, despite their grandeur. And I think that would have gone down really well during the war, when everyone was really suffering and the nation had to pull together. And there are stories of the Queen knitting, of her giving her coats to other children who might need them more as well. So I think she was always really aware of her own privilege and, you know, wanted to be very generous to others as well.
So one of the biggest changes that affected the world of fashion generally in the Second World War was the introduction of austerity measures and austerity regulations. These restricted the amount of surface embellishment that could be included on a dress. They even limited the number of seams that certain items could be made using, and this was all in an effort to preserve these valuable materials that were in very short supply. One of the major introductions was ration coupons, which were to prevent people from spending lavishly. And the young princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, they were not given any exceptions to this rule. They had to follow them. And this was incredibly important for Elizabeth because she was very aware that she was a lot safer than the majority of the people in the country, and she felt very guilty about that she wasn't truly having the same experience as everybody else.
Elizabeth and Margaret joined in the war efforts too. Elizabeth became the first female member of the family to serve full-time in the forces, working for the ATS.
So this was another way for her to continue to understand the country at large. It came at a very awkward time. She was in her teenage years, she was growing very rapidly, which meant she often needed new clothes quite quickly. So to get around these austerity measures, she would borrow her mother's clothes, even some of her father's clothes. So the Queen in this period really reflected this sort of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and do what you can with what you have.
There are certainly lots of quotes and lots of information which suggests that she wasn't obsessed with fashion, that the Queen wasn't poring over the latest fashion magazines. But I think she would have learnt from her mother that in the role that she was going to have as an adult, that clothes were very important, and so she would have taken an interest in that sense, knowing that she had to look the part, but she wasn't necessarily wanting to wear all the latest designers and tap into every trend going.
Norman Hartnell was well known to be one of Queen Elizabeth's favorite designers. So much so, Hartnell was asked to design two of the most important dresses of her life, her wedding dress and the ceremonial gown to be worn at her coronation. In 1947, 2 years after the end of World War II, Elizabeth and Philip married, and Margaret was a bridesmaid. It was, of course, a very grand affair, and it lifted the spirits of the nation at a crucial time in history.
So the Queen's wedding dress came at a pivotal time for Britain and the world, really. It was just a couple of years after the end of the Second World War. There had been so much rationing, so much distress, really, and this was an opportunity for a real glamorous celebration. This exciting young couple, this woman who was on the cusp of becoming Queen. This was a moment of real excitement, and Norman Hartnell was very conscious of showing that with the dress that he designed for her. So he took inspiration from Botticelli's painting Primavera. Primavera means spring in Italian, so it's this perfect symbolism of the Queen being someone who's going to lead the world into this new post-war era.
One of the things that made Norman Hartnell such an incredible designer was that he could very easily find historical inspiration and give it a modern twist, and tried to create a dress that was timeless and elegant and resembled those Renaissance-style gowns.
And her wedding dress was all about celebrating that, whilst at the same time being conscious of the difficulties which the world was still facing.
It was a beautiful, almost fit and flare gown that was covered with flowers that were taken from Botticelli paintings, made with thousands of seed pearls. It was truly a beautiful dress that represented this urge for a rebirth after the war. But the problem was, austerity regulations were still in place and ration coupons were still needed for this dress. Now obviously one that's as spectacular as this is going to cost an awful lot. The Queen saved up a lot of her ration coupons, but she didn't quite have enough. So lots of brides-to-be all across the country who wanted their future Queen to have the most spectacular wedding dress sent their own ration coupons.
You know, she couldn't use those tokens, and she just used her own with a few extra that the government granted her. And she had this dress that was at once very beautiful but also understated and classic, and I think it would look as good walking down an aisle today as it did in 1947. So the coronation gown was a completely unique commission for Norman Hartnell. I mean, this is a real once-in-a-lifetime creation, and he worked very closely with the Queen to create something completely perfect for the moment.
She wanted something that had a similar feel to her wedding dress, that really honoured the tradition and the history behind the coronation event, whilst also giving it a modern air. Rather than looking at Renaissance inspiration again, Hartnell looked at the mid-Victorian period, which was a favourite of his. So he created a design that featured a beautiful sweetheart neckline, a lovely full skirt, and was very, very plain. When the Queen saw the designs, she loved them, but she did have a few problems. First of all, she thought that the dress should have the emblems of all the Commonwealth nations, not just those of the United Kingdom, so Hartnell had those added. But the Queen also thought that the dress was just a little bit too similar to her wedding dress and asked if he could include some colour in the designs. So he ended up using a multicoloured supply of diamonds to create the emblems.
Queen Elizabeth's coronation was truly the event of the century. She was, by that time, filling her father's shoes, and Britain had grown an enormous amount of love and respect for her.
And it was a really beautiful white dress with incredibly intricate, brightly coloured floral embroideries. All the different flowers represented the different territories which the Queen would reign over. You had everything from English roses to Welsh leeks. Hartnell wanted to have daffodils on the dress, but leeks were the official Welsh emblem, so he had to go with that, through to wattle for Australia. So it was this whole array of beautiful flora and fauna which adorned the coronation gown and made it an absolutely spectacular design. It was very structured, and the Queen is said to have described it as being like a radiator to wear because there were so many layers to get on, but it really has stood the test of time and really looks very spectacular still today.
Another dress that garnered much attention was the famous magpie dress. Designed by Hartnell, it was nothing like his usual designs. It was simple and lacked any intricate detail. The dress wowed the public to such a degree that within 24 hours, hundreds of recreations were made in different color combinations.
Trial and error and trying to figure out what her version of a royal wardrobe looked like. And so we see some styles that we've never really seen her use again.
She attended a film premiere in London, and she was wearing this incredible gown which has since been called the magpie gown. It was made by Norman Hartnell, and it was almost a menswear inspiration. It looked a little bit like a tuxedo at the top.
The magpie dress was incredibly chic and very, very simple, which meant that it could be very easily replicated, and it was.
And the photographs of this dress were in all the newspapers the next day, and they even showed people how they could recreate the dress at home. They reproduced patterns, and there were copies of the dress that could be bought in shops. So it was a real example of this young, glamorous queen influencing everyone's style.
This was something that the royal family weren't quite ready for yet. There was still an understanding that royal fashion should be something that people admired, that they aspired towards, but that they could never truly replicate. It kept them feeling exclusive. I think it's very telling that the Queen never wore this dress or any dress similar to this ever again.
As the Queen grew into her role as monarch, she also found and nurtured her own sense of style. In the 1950s, she had a very feminine look, which she carried off effortlessly with her youthful sparkle.
Standing at last on Australian soil, on this spot that is the birthplace of the nation, I want to tell you all how happy I am to be amongst you and how much I look forward to my journey through Australia.
So in the 1950s and in the early years of her reign, the Queen was a real fashion icon in a way. She could really wear the big trends of the day. So Christian Dior's new look was really dictating how women dressed in the 1950s.
Christian Dior was chiefly responsible for launching the most recent fashion revolution. Breaking away from the law to open his own establishment, Dior became world famous overnight when his first collection, based on what promptly became known as the new look, won instant acceptance by the women of fashion, the fashion editors, and American buyers whose influence makes styles.
So it was all these tiny nipped-in waists, these big full skirts, and if you look back at the Queen's outfits during this time, they really reflect that aesthetic. But when the 1960s came around, the fashion was obviously for mini skirts and, you know, mods, and that's not really a style that a Queen who's kind of entering into her late 30s by that point can really sport. So she looked more to creating a timeless look that would work for her no matter what was in fashion. And I think that's where we see the real foundations of her style today.
The very severe lines of the 1960s fashions really flattered her figure, and it's something that she's sort of held on to and kept with her as she's moved forward through the decades and into the 21st century.
There are few occasions when we see our Queen wearing the full robe and regalia. One such occasion when we have seen her don her majestic attire was when Her Majesty gave her speech in the state opening of Parliament in 1966. The Queen was seen in all her splendor, wearing robe and crown. It is a ceremony steeped in history and tradition, one the Queen takes most. The popular gown, again created by Norman Hartnell, went on to be altered by Angela Kelly and Stuart Parvin, becoming Princess Beatrice's wedding dress in 2020. As she matured, she turned away from the nipped-in dresses to more sensible skirt suits, from pastels to bright and daring colors. This signaled a transformation from the delicate, almost mystical princess to a strong and capable Queen.
So Hardy Amys was really pivotal for the Queen's fashion evolution. He started designing for her when she was still a princess, and he designed some really gorgeous, fashionable outfits for her in the 1950s. But what he was very conscious of was that the Queen couldn't be wearing these trend-setting clothes forever. So gently and slowly together, the Queen and Hardy Amys sort of went on this journey through the late 20th century, always adapting the designs for what would work for the Queen at the time and nodding to fashion without being a slave to it. And he knew the demands of the Queen's role as well and would create designs for her that would always make her feel comfortable.
They both believed that it should be intensely practical and suit her lifestyle, but part of suiting her lifestyle also meant that it should be royal to its core. So the look that he created for the Queen was one that was very simplistic at a first glance, but the quality of the tailoring, the quality of the fabric, it was the best available. It was incredibly expensive. So she gave off this sense of quality, of luxury, of royalty without it being too garish.
Queen Elizabeth is one of the most well-traveled monarchs in history, having made over 280 overseas state visits to other countries and Commonwealth nations. These trips are planned to the last second: who she will meet, what ribbon she may cut or cake she may slice, what diplomatic ties she will help strengthen. What she wears plays an extremely important role. Each outfit needs to be durable, comfortable, and it must represent the modern monarch.
So all the Queen's clothes are really perfectly made to the highest possible standards. When you speak to the designers who make her dresses, they speak about how much attention is paid to the quality of the cloth.
The Queen has been doing this for a very long time. She knows exactly what her clothes need to do for her, so she has very specific requirements about the whole process. Nothing is picked for her that she doesn't personally approve. Every design that gets sent her way, she needs to give it a tick or a cross to let the designer know whether it's good or bad.
Is it going to stand up to the challenges of a royal engagement? She needs clothes made from materials that won't crease, that will look good in all photographs, that will sparkle if they need to. So there's really a lot of demands on the clothes that she has, which is why they have to be made to couture level standards. Everything is really immaculately made, and she's very passionate about British design and British manufacturing and really supporting the very best.
Armies created some of the Queen's most memorable looks. One dress in particular the Queen wore to the service of Thanksgiving for her Silver Jubilee at St. Paul's Cathedral in June 1977. The striking pink dress was the epitome of elegance.
The most interesting and unique hat that the Queen has ever worn is the Simone Merman creation that she wore for the investiture of Prince Charles as Prince of Wales in 1969. Everyone that sees it is very confused because it's nothing like anything she's ever worn. It's this dome-like creation that was made to complement the setting of the investiture, which was at Cardiff Castle. So it took inspiration from medieval and Tudor headdresses.
One of the Queen's most daring looks came in 1999 when she attended the Royal Variety performance in Birmingham. The famous Harlequin dress designed by Karl Ludwig Ries caused great excitement. It displayed the Queen's willingness to experiment with fashion, unafraid to try something different.
The Harlequin dress is really one of the Queen's happiest outfits ever, and I think everyone who sees it smiles because it's so many bright colours, this very beautiful pattern, and she wore this in Variety performance. And I think it's interesting that it came right at the end of the 1990s, which had been quite a difficult decade for the royal family. It says, you know, that she's happy and that she's optimistic for the future. And it's just, you know, a brilliantly joyful fashion statement.
By the 2000s, the Queen's wardrobe needed a refresh. Angela Kelly is the personal advisor to the Queen, meaning she takes responsibility for curating and designing the Queen's wardrobe. Kelly was responsible for the modernized look we know and expect from the Queen today.
So Angela Kelly joined the royal household in the late 1990s, and she observed that the Queen perhaps wasn't wearing the most flattering clothes possible. She thought that the Queen could do better, that she could wear more flattering silhouettes, that she could really carry off some brighter colours and some more spectacular outfits, really. And so slowly Angela Kelly's influence increased, and the Queen had a new fashion strategy in place. So Angela helped really refine her look and make her into the style icon that she is today. And Angela Kelly is really behind some of the Queen's most famous outfits of recent years.
There's nobody in the world who knows the Queen's fashion like Angela Kelly. She's been her assistant for quite some time now, and it's her job to curate, to design, in even some cases, the clothes that the Queen is going to wear. She's with her almost 24/7, so she knows exactly the demands that the Queen is faced with and knows what she wants from her fashion. Angela Kelly is really the person who created the modern Queen's wardrobe. She brought in vibrancy to her wardrobe that has really helped her as she's aged. She has always been a small woman, but in recent years, with age, that has become more pronounced. So it's allowed her to be more present, to demand more attention.
Even into her 90s, Her Majesty has maintained her interest in fashion. In 2018, she attended London Fashion Week. She wore Angela Kelly's duck egg blue dress that was detailed with Swarovski crystals, paired with black gloves. The Queen sat in the front row, happily chatting with Vogue editor Anna Wintour. A memorable moment for the fashion world.
Not really enjoying it.
It is, Your Majesty, it is. A very long journey.
Take it easy.
I think bright colours are absolutely fundamental to the Queen's look, and you can trace back for decades that she's always loved and been very brave with her colours. So, you know, from lime green to fuchsia to purple to red to cobalt blue to pastels, you know, she's never afraid to experiment or surprise us. I think that's what's so exciting. It's always a real thrill to see what the colours will be. There's always a hat, there's always that trusty Lorna handbag in place, her block-heeled shoes as well.
So one part of the Queen's fashion that often gets overlooked is her handbags. She's always seen with a small, very practical handbag, and it's a favourite topic for royal watchers. They all like to speculate about whether or not the Queen has a hidden language with her bags. It's been suggested that when the Queen is out and about and having a conversation that she would like to politely wrap up, she'll pass her handbag from one arm to the other, and that will signal to her team that she's ready to move on, and they will step in and conclude the conversation. Another constant is her pearls. Pearls have always been a favourite for the royal family. The Queen Mother was never without a string of pearls, but the Queen's pearls have a very personal meaning. Her parents would gift her 2 pearls every birthday up until her 18th, so that by then she would have a full string of pearls.
In her more off-duty moments, she really loves her silk headscarves. So if the Queen's at a horse show or at Balmoral, she's guaranteed to be wearing a beautiful Hermes silk headscarf.
Even as style changes, the Queen is known to have certain elements of her wardrobe that remain the same. It is those consistent elements that help to carve out such an iconic and recognizable style.
The Queen has always been very conscious to pay diplomatic tributes to people through her clothing when she's visiting different countries, and she's visited hundreds of countries during her reign, and she's always thought very carefully about that. So whenever she's in Australia, she'll wear a yellow outfit in a nod to Australia's national colour. She has a beautiful fern brooch that she wears if she goes to New Zealand. It was given to her by the women of New Zealand early in her reign, and the fern is a symbol of New Zealand, so it's always really nice to see her wearing that.
She knows that the majority of the coverage of any event she goes to will be photographs. So if she can make it very, very clear where in the world she's traveling or who it is she's hosting, that adds extra punch and makes sure that that message spreads a lot further.
There was a wonderful moment in the 1980s where she wore a gown embellished with California poppies when she was at a dinner in California. We also saw the Queen visiting Ireland in 2011. That was such an important visit for her because of the political history between the two countries, and she really showed how successful she wanted the visit to be by wearing a gown embellished with 2,000 shamrocks.
Uachtaráin agus a coide. Prince Philip and I are delighted to be here and to experience at first hand Ireland's world-famous hospitality.
So she will often borrow from the national colours to shape her wardrobe or the colours of the flag. She'll also look for specific emblems, particularly the national flora of that country. A very famous dress of hers is the wattle dress that she wore for her first tour as Queen in Australia, where she incorporated lots of the national colours in her wardrobe, and that dress particularly featured a spray of wattle, the national flower.
The shores of Australia slip slowly away from Gothic. This will be their last view of our Southland, possibly for some years to come. But the link, always there, which their visit has so immensely strengthened, will forever remain.
Great thought goes into each look. In fact, the Queen often incorporates diplomatic messages into her outfits. One method of achieving this is by the use of color. Sometimes she will wear a historical brooch which reflects lasting relationships with other countries. However, using colors in this way to reflect diplomatic messages, there has been the odd occasion when they have been misinterpreted.
One hat of the Queen's that I did really love, she wore to the state opening of Parliament in 2017, and this was a moment when Britain was in the full throes of the Brexit debate, and this hat ended up going viral because it was a blue hat with these yellow flowers on it, which everyone thought created the European flag, and they decided that this must be a message, the Queen's status as a Remainer. Angela Kelly has since said that it was no such message and it was a pure coincidence, but I loved how excited everybody got about that hat.
Through her 90 years of choosing what to wear, some of the Queen's looks have been more memorable than others.
My favourite outfit that the Queen has worn was the outfit that she wore for the Thanksgiving service for the Diamond Jubilee back in 2012. It was an Angela Kelly creation, so it is this classic Queen silhouette with the coat dress, a large hat, but it was given this glamorous quality by Kelly. She literally turned the Queen into a diamond. It's covered in little diamantes and it shimmers. And she's wearing the Cullinan brooch, which is one of the largest diamond brooches that the Queen owns. It literally turned her into a representation of the Diamond Jubilee.
She often will choose a brooch with special meaning. We saw that during the COVID lockdown, the first COVID lockdown, when the Queen gave an address to the nation and she was wearing a turquoise brooch, and turquoise shows sort of healing and calm, and that was just exactly what the nation needed at that moment. So she always has the perfect outfit for the job.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
In 2007, the Queen and Prince Philip celebrated 60 years of marriage. To mark the anniversary, they recreated an image from their honeymoon in 1947. Elizabeth wore the same brooch, which had originally been given by Prince Albert to Queen Victoria, pearls and a skirt and jacket with a similar cut. 60 years later, and she still looks classically elegant, highlighting the consistency in her style. The role of a constitutional monarch is incredibly important. Her role is steeped in history and tradition, but there has been a remarkable change in recent centuries when it comes to the look and feel of the monarchy. The kings and queens of history have demanded great attention, and they have, for the most part, been deservedly revered. The luxury and splendor of their attire was a key factor in creating this great sense of majesty. As the world has modernized and the technological age has dawned, The Queen has taken this on board and modernized her look too. She once was a real fairy tale princess, wearing tiaras and ball gowns. But now, into her late 90s, it's most unusual to see her in anything other than one of her classically designed skirt suits. From a princess in wartime Britain to the longest reigning monarch in British history, she is defined in history with a century of royal style as the Queen of many colors.
Change has become a constant. Managing it has become an expanding discipline. The way we embrace it defines our
Almost
future.
a century of royal style. The Queen has made fashion history with a look that reflects the extraordinary consistency and longevity of her reign. In an era of social, cultural, and technological change, the Queen has remained a constant, becoming an icon around the world, the epitome of what it means to be a Great Britain.
It seems to me that this country has advantages to exploit in this exciting challenge. We in these islands have the benefit of a long and proud history. This not only gives us a trusted framework of stability and continuity to ease the process of change, but it also tells us what is of lasting value. Only the passage of time can filter out the ephemeral from the enduring, and what endure are the characteristics and the timeless values that guide us.